June 2021. A brutal drought hits Nevada, shrinking Silver Ridge Lake to its lowest level in decades. What should have been just cracked earth and dry wind turned into something far stranger. Near the western shoreline, a fisherman noticed a glint of metal beneath the mud. He thought it was old junk, until divers arrived. When they pulled the object from the lake bed, the truth surfaced with it. A 1970 blue-gray Ford Mustang, sealed under 48 years of silt. Inside were two skeletons, still strapped in their seats. One wore a silver keychain engraved with the initials R. Whitmore. Within hours, the story spread across Nevada. Locals whispered the same name: Amy and Rachel Whitmore, the sisters who vanished without a trace back in 1973. For nearly half a century, their disappearance had haunted Boulder Ridge County. Now, the lake had given them back, along with questions no one was ready to answer. Police sealed off the scene as forensic teams worked through the night. Every headline asked the same thing: who put that car there? And how did it stay hidden so long? As we move forward, we'll uncover the sisters' final hours, the men who once stood under suspicion, and the quiet town that spent 48 years keeping its silence. Stay with us and share what you think happened before the water finally spoke. After months without rain, Silver Ridge Lake fell to a level locals hadn't seen in their lifetimes. Boat ramps hung over dry air. Shoreline markers sat high on cracked mud. What looked like another hot, empty afternoon changed when a fisherman named Earl Jennings worked his line along the western flats. As the water pulled back, he noticed a rectangle of metal glinting through the silt. He thought it might be a buried engine block from an old ski boat. He stepped closer, saw the curve of a fender, and realized he was staring at the roofline of a car. Earl called the Boulder Ridge County Sheriff's Office at 3:42 p.m. Deputies arrived within 20 minutes, marked off a wide perimeter, and photographed the site from every angle. The top of the vehicle sat just inches below the surface. A long crease in the mud pointed downslope toward deeper water. It looked like the car had been dragged. The duty sergeant ordered a hold and called for the state dive team. By early evening, a mobile command post faced the lake. Divers suited up beside an inflatable Zodiac while a crane truck idled near a dirt access road. Visibility was poor. The water was the color of tea and thick with silt. Divers fanned the mud by hand, exposed a rear quarter panel, looped a strap through the frame and signaled to lift. The vehicle rose slowly, shedding decades of silt. When the sun caught the grill, a badge appeared that no one on shore expected to see. Mustang, a 1970 model, blue-gray under the rust. The crowd went quiet. The crane operator set the car onto tarps near the waterline. Deputies stepped back, gloved up, and opened the driver's door. Inside were two sets of skeletal remains, both seated, both restrained by seatbelts that had fused into the frames. No wallets, no visible IDs. On the floorboard, a silver keychain had slipped down between the seats. A technician placed it in an evidence bag and wiped away lake grit. The engraving read, R. Whitmore. That name traveled faster than the crane could swing. A deputy pulled up an old clipping on his phone, and in minutes the perimeter filled with whispers. Amy and Rachel Whitmore, the sisters who vanished in 1973. Back then, patrol cars combed the highways, volunteers walked the washes, and pilots circled the lake at dusk. No car, no skid marks, no sign of a crash. The family held a vigil every June and waited for the water to give something back. It never did, until that afternoon. As dusk settled, lights from news vans flickered across the shoreline. A helicopter traced slow circles above the cove. The sheriff gave a short statement. A vehicle had been recovered, 2 bodies were inside, identification was pending. No questions. Behind him, investigators pulled a canopy over the Mustang and started a methodical grid. They mapped tire direction, seat positions, gear selector, and window height. They measured the angle where the drag marks entered the water. The line wasn't straight. It curved, as if the vehicle had been guided on a rope. The next morning, technicians rolled the Mustang into a forensic bay. The exterior told a long story in short details. The bumper showed impact consistent with a heavy tow point. The rear valance had gouges higher than a typical car-to-car bump, suggesting something taller had pushed or latched to it. Paint samples taken from those gouges didn't match the original body color. Under magnification, analysts noted a flat olive-gray primer layer common to military equipment from the early 1970s. Inside the cabin, time had done its work. The driver's seat was set farther back, likely to fit an adult of above-average height. The passenger seat sat mid-rail. The belts were still buckled. The webbing had degraded, but the latch plates stayed in place. One forensic specialist, careful with each word, observed that the angle of the buckles and the locked retractor positions were unusual for a vehicle that had simply rolled in nose first. It suggested the belts might have been fastened before submersion, not during a struggle in the water. No broken glass. No airbag to check. This was 1970. The keychain drew the clearest line to history. In 1973, Rachel Whitmore often signed notes with her initials, according to an old-school newsletter archived by the library. The style of the engraving matched a popular jeweler in downtown Las Vegas at the time. It wasn't proof by itself, but it connected the car to the sisters' world. By noon, Silver Ridge buzzed. Outside the diner the sisters once visited, people compared memories like puzzle pieces. A retired teacher said he remembered the post office bulletin board with their photos pinned under the word missing. A gas station owner recalled deputies asking to see night receipts from June '73. A woman who had grown up 2 streets over stared at the lake and said on camera, "That family had power." Nobody asked questions back then. Some wanted answers now. Others said the past should rest. Behind the scenes, the sheriff's office expanded the scene log and brought in a cold case liaison from the state. They posted 2 units overnight to protect the site. They also began canvassing anyone who had reported unusual activity near the marina in the early '70s. The original file listed more than 100 tips. Some were as thin as rumor, some as specific as a late-night engine heard near the old fire road. Most of those voices had gone quiet. The file remained a stack of paper that never found its ending. At the lab, technicians lifted carpet fibers where they could, bagged the belts, and swabbed the interior metal for trace residue. A corrosion expert studied the undercarriage and noted scrape patterns along the differential and leaf springs, consistent with a vehicle being pulled from behind, rather than rolling under its own power. Sonar scans from the dive team showed twin trails on the lake bed, a narrow set of ruts leading out from the beach, then a wider, deeper drag, like weight being drawn by a strap. The lines converged where the Mustang had settled. Reporters pressed for a statement about cause and manner. Investigators refused to speculate. They stuck to what they could see and verify. A 1970 Mustang had spent decades under silt. 2 occupants were inside. One piece of property bore the initials R. Whitmore, and multiple features suggested the vehicle did not arrive at the bottom by accident. The sheriff repeated the same sentence to every microphone. "We will follow the evidence." The evidence kept adding quiet lines. The glove box latch had been taped shut with a strip so old it came up in flakes. The trunk lock was intact, but showed tool marks under the bezel. The handbrake was down. The gear selector sat in neutral. The ignition was off. The key was missing. On the roof pillars, faint scuffs formed parallel arcs, as if a rope or chain had rested there before the car went under. None of these details closed a case. Together they built a picture that didn't look like a wrong turn in the dark. Back on the shoreline, older residents traded names and dates. They talked about the search parties, the line of headlights along the dam road, the way the town shut its doors early for weeks. They remembered the sisters as friendly, reliable, always together. One man said he saw Amy's Mustang at the Silver Ridge Diner the night they vanished, parked straight, windows up. Another remembered a loud engine on the fire road close to midnight. None of it ever led to recovery. The lake had kept its hold. Now, the lake had released it. The Mustang sat under bright lamps, every inch recorded. The bones were handled with care, placed in separate containers, and escorted under guard for identification. The sheriff's office notified surviving relatives that a vehicle had been found and that it might be connected to the long-standing disappearance. They offered no promises. They had a car, 2 occupants, and a town watching closely. The discovery did more than pull steel from water. It reopened a timeline that had been paused for 48 years. A fisherman's call led to a perimeter, a lift, a badge on a grill, 2 seats, a keychain, and the same question that started this story in 1973. How did Amy and Rachel Whitmore go missing? And who helped their car vanish beneath a lake that wasn't supposed to give them back? Time buries truth, but drought has a strange way of draining guilt back to the surface. Before the drought, before the cameras and the headlines, there was a night in 1973 when 2 sisters from a small desert town simply never came home. Silver Ridge, Nevada, 40 miles southeast of Las Vegas. A working town built on the edge of Hoover Dam, with a noise of turbines mixed with desert wind. Most families here lived by a rhythm of shift schedules and paychecks from the authority. People left doors unlocked. Everyone knew everyone else. That summer, America was running on empty. Gas prices climbing, rationing signs on station pumps, and the country learning to count miles in dollars. For young people, freedom meant a full tank and a stretch of open road. Amy and Rachel Whitmore had both. Amy, 22, was a biology major at the University of Nevada, known for her steady grades and calm confidence. Rachel, 19, was the opposite. Creative, impulsive, and always with a Polaroid camera around her neck. They lived with their father, Richard Whitmore, a senior engineer at Hoover Dam. Since their mother's death a decade earlier, the sisters were everything to him. His family, his pride, and as time would show, his secret burden. June 16, 1973. A clear Saturday that started like any other. At 5:40 p.m., Amy stopped at the Sinclair station off Route 93. The attendant remembered her, polite, paying in cash, asking for a receipt. At 6:30, the sisters had dinner at the Silver Ridge Diner, their usual spot. A waitress recalled the song on the radio, Bad Bad Leroy Brown, and how the girls laughed about the lyrics. They left a few minutes before 7 in Amy's blue-gray Mustang, heading toward home. Around 8:10 p.m., a classmate of Rachel's reported seeing that same Mustang heading west toward the Hoover access road. She couldn't tell who was behind the wheel. At 9 o'clock, a couple living near the dam road heard the sound of a car engine echoing through the canyon. Then nothing. No skid marks, no crash, no sign of a struggle. Just silence settling back over the desert. By morning, Richard Whitmore called the sheriff's office. His voice was calm but direct. "My daughters didn't come home." Deputies logged the call at 7:14 a.m. The first assumption was a runaway case. 2 young women, summer night, maybe heading to California. But the facts didn't fit. Neither sister had withdrawn money, packed a bag, or told friends about any plan. The Mustang was gone too, leaving no trace on the highway. Search teams mobilized that afternoon. Helicopters scanned the cliffs around the dam. Volunteers swept through washes and service roads. Local divers checked small inlets near the marina. Over 50 miles of shoreline were searched in 2 weeks, but nothing turned up. Not a tire, not a license plate, not even a piece of fabric. The Silver Ridge Gazette headline on June 22nd read, "2 sisters vanish on Route 93. Mystery deepens." By the end of July, the search wound down. Some locals believed they'd been abducted. Others whispered they'd run away. Then the stories grew darker. Rumors said Amy had been pregnant. Others claimed Rachel was involved with a married man stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. Still others blamed smugglers using the desert highways at night. None of it could be proved, but each rumor added a new shadow. In a town that small, gossip moved faster than rescue boats. Richard Whitmore stayed composed. As an engineer, he believed problems had solutions, and he tried to solve this one like a design flaw. He hired private divers, paid for aerial searches, and posted a $5,000 reward, a large sum in 1973. Yet when reporters came, he spoke little. One journalist described him as calm, calculated, almost too controlled. A month after the disappearance, he gave his last interview. "They're gone," he said quietly, "but not forgotten." After that, he stopped talking to the press. Investigators turned their attention to Amy's boyfriend, Tom Ridley, a local mechanic. Witnesses had seen them arguing outside his shop earlier that evening. Ridley admitted the fight, but claimed he left town by 9:30, driving to Reno for a job the next morning. Gas receipts and motel phone records confirmed his alibi. The police cleared him, but the town did not. Business dried up, and within a year he left Silver Ridge altogether. Decades later, his daughter wrote online, "My father died carrying a story no one believed." By December, the case was reclassified as inactive. The sheriff told a reporter, "Unless the water drops, this mystery stays buried." The phrase stuck, repeated for years whenever someone brought up the sisters. By early 1975, the Whitmore home stood empty. Richard transferred to a new post in Henderson, sold the Mustang's registration plate records, and cut off contact with most neighbors. The story drifted into legend. Locals started calling it the Silver Ridge ghost car case. Each June, people still gathered by the lake. They lit candles, read the sisters' names, and left flowers that wilted under the desert sun. Teachers used the story to warn students about driving late. Teenagers turned it into folklore. 2 headlights seen moving under the lake surface on summer nights. The case file stored in the basement of the sheriff's office yellowed with time. A few new deputies flipped through it once in a while but found nothing new to add. The mystery became routine. A story told so often it lost its edge. The water became their grave, and the silence became the town's habit. It wasn't just the lack of clues that buried the investigation. It was the time it lived in. In 1973, there was no national missing persons database, no DNA matching, and no digital tracking. Jurisdiction lines between local police, the dam's federal security team, and nearby military bases created dead ends. Each agency kept its own notes, none of them connected. While America was caught up in Watergate and the energy crisis, 2 missing sisters from a quiet Nevada town slipped through the cracks of a nation too distracted to notice. For decades, the Whitmore name faded into local memory. Their faces hung in the diner for years until the frame warped from heat and sun. People aged, retired, moved away. The town grew. New families came. And the old ones stopped talking about that summer. The mystery lingered like background noise. Always there, never questioned. But time doesn't keep secrets forever. It moves, it shifts, and sometimes it takes something with it. When the lake finally receded nearly half a century later, what it left behind wasn't just a car. It was the truth that had been sitting in the dark all along. In the following chapter, we'll uncover how a single piece of metal, found 50 years after that night, would lead investigators straight into the shadow of the United States military. June 18th, 1973, 2 days after the Whitmore sisters were reported missing. Inside the Boulder Ridge County Sheriff's Office, detectives gathered around a cluttered bulletin board. Photographs of Amy and Rachel hung beside a road map marked in red ink, arrows circling toward Hoover Dam Road. A note on the side read, "Last seen, 6:30 p.m., Silver Ridge Diner." The first name on the suspect list was Tom Ridley, 25 years old, local mechanic, Amy's boyfriend. A waitress from the diner told officers she saw them arguing outside the parking lot that evening. Nothing violent, but heated. In a town as small as Silver Ridge, that was enough. Ridley lived alone behind his garage on Route 93. The sign above the door read, "Ridley Auto Works," its paint already peeling in the desert heat. He'd served briefly in the Air Force as an aircraft technician before opening his shop. Hard-working, quiet, maybe too quiet. Some said he wasn't Whitmore material, not educated, not polished, not rich. Detectives arrived before noon. They found him under a car, his hands covered in grease. He didn't resist when they asked him to come down to the station. The interrogation began just after 2 p.m. and stretched into the night. Ridley admitted he and Amy had argued. She wanted space. He wanted another chance. But he swore she left him alive and unharmed. "I didn't touch her," he said. "She was angry, but she wasn't afraid of me." When asked about Rachel, he hesitated. "She looked up to Amy," he said softly. If Amy was leaving, Rachel followed her. Detectives pressed him on his whereabouts that night. He explained that after the argument he left town around 9:30 p.m. to drive north for a repair job in Reno. They didn't believe him, not at first. But the evidence backed him up. Gas receipts from a Shell station near Tonopah logged a sale at 10:47 p.m. A motel camera captured him checking in at 1:03 a.m. The night clerk confirmed his stay. He couldn't have been anywhere near Silver Ridge when the sisters vanished. Still, suspicion had already spread faster than the proof. By the third day, local papers ran the headline, "Boyfriend questioned in Whitmore disappearance." Within a week, the word questioned had turned into suspect. By month's end, it became killer. People stopped bringing their cars to Ridley Auto Works. Customers crossed the street when he walked downtown. Someone smashed his front window and left a note that said, "We know what you did." He tried to ignore it, but in Silver Ridge, silence doesn't clear your name. It fills the blanks for you. Reporters swarmed the sheriff's office. The Las Vegas radio stations picked up the story, calling it the Silver Ridge Lover's Mystery. One evening broadcast claimed, without evidence, that a jealous argument may have turned deadly. The department released a vague statement. "We're following all leads, including those close to the victims." That line sealed Ridley's fate in the court of public opinion. A week later, a reporter asked Richard Whitmore if he believed Ridley had anything to do with his daughter's disappearance. He paused before answering. "My girls trusted him," he said quietly. "Maybe they shouldn't have." That single sentence traveled through the town like wildfire. Within months, Ridley's life collapsed. Creditors came for his garage. His tools were auctioned off. He sold his truck to pay rent and then stopped paying that too. By spring of 1974, he packed what little he had into a duffel bag and left Nevada behind. He drove north to Oregon, took a job as a long-haul trucker, and kept moving. People said he wanted distance. What he really wanted was silence. No one in Silver Ridge ever apologized. No one ever asked again if he might have been innocent. Back home, the case stalled. By September, the investigation file grew thinner, not thicker. Every lead circled back to the same dead end. The highway turned up nothing. The damn road was scanned again. No tire marks, no debris, no sign of a crash. In November, the sheriff wrote the final note on the case summary: "No further leads. Case suspended pending new evidence." The Whitmore file was boxed, labeled, and moved to a basement shelf. The detectives assigned to it retired or transferred. For decades it gathered dust while new crimes took its place. Around the office, the younger deputies had a nickname for it: the ghost case. Nobody wanted to open it. Meanwhile, the town adjusted to its own version of peace. The Whitmores stopped answering questions. Richard withdrew completely, canceling every interview request. To the few neighbors who tried to visit, he said only, "I've said all I can." Some suspected he was protecting someone. Others said grief had hollowed him out. Either way, the silence became part of Silver Ridge itself, a rule people lived by. As for Ridley, he never came back. His name faded until it was just a line in an old newspaper, a footnote beside the sisters who never returned. But stories have a way of surviving long after the people in them disappear. In 2010, nearly 4 decades after the disappearance, an old message board dedicated to unsolved American cold cases lit up with a new post. It was written by someone named Claire Ridley. She wrote, "My father died in 2008. He never stopped talking about Amy Whitmore. He said she was the love of his life, and that someday someone would find that car. He used to say, "It's still out there. It has to be." The post spread quietly through online forums, catching the attention of a small group of amateur investigators. They began reviewing topographic maps of Silver Ridge Lake, comparing drought records to years when the waterline had dropped. They traced elevation charts, marked old access roads, and argued over the most likely entry points where a car could disappear without a trace. None of them knew that the lake they were studying on Google Earth held the answer, and that in a decade's time, drought would reveal it for real. In the end, the truth about Tom Ridley was simpler than any headline ever printed. He wasn't a killer. He was collateral damage, the kind a small town creates when fear needs a name. In Silver Ridge, guilt wasn't proven. It was inherited. And long after he left, the same silence that condemned him continued to protect something far more powerful than gossip. The truth doesn't drown. It just waits for the right tide. Sometimes the answers aren't in the bones. They're in the metal. After the Mustang came up in 2021, the forensic team stopped treating it like a tomb and started treating it like a machine that could still talk. They logged every gouge and scrape on the frame. The pattern on the rear valance didn't look like a highway crash. It looked like hooks. A lab note captured it in plain language. These aren't crash marks. These are military-grade toe points. Nevada's state lab pulled tiny flakes from the deepest scratches and shipped them to a military materials facility in Denver. Under a microscope, the primer told its own story. Olive gray flat, certain binders from a specific decade. The report came back with a line that reset the case. Primer consistent with M35 military transport vehicles manufactured and serviced in the early 1970s. That finding moved the investigation from county roads to federal supply lines. Detective Laura Bennett, 34, assigned to the cold case unit, started connecting the dots no one had ever drawn. She requested the Hoover Base Logistics Division archives, records that tracked who took which vehicles, where, and why. Most of it had been scanned into a federal database. Buried in June 1973, the system flagged a notation that matched the lake and the date. One M35 truck listed as missing during the week of June 16 to 23. The requisition in the log for the night of June 16th named a single authorized driver, Thomas E. Hale. Bennett ran Hale. Thomas Edward Hale, born 1944, Air Force mechanic turned base maintenance tech, assigned to the Hoover Military Support Station in the early 70s. No formal discipline, good evaluations. Then a single line in his personnel file that didn't fit the rest. Reassigned to Arizona, June 1973. No explanation provided. Some transfers happen for merit, others for convenience. To understand how a base truck might touch a civilian disappearance, Bennett needed the operations context for that week. She found a program name she didn't recognize. Operation Blue Dust, an old logistics partnership between the military and the Dam Authority. When she asked for the files, the answer was short and final. Restricted. She elevated the request. The FBI stepped in and secured a poor microfilm scan of a transport log. The page was faded, but one line still cut through. June 17th, vehicle requisitioned for civilian assist under clearance RW. RW wasn't a random set of initials in this case. It matched the father of the missing sisters, Richard Whitmore, an engineer with clearance at the dam. That changed the temperature in the room. Bennett and a state investigator drove to Tucson to find Hale. He lived in a one-story house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. He answered the door slowly, thin and guarded. In the living room, he kept his eyes on the carpet. When asked about the summer of 1973, he said, "I don't remember anything about that summer." When Bennett used the name Whitmore, his hand tightened on the arm of the chair. He didn't add anything else. The interview ended without a confession, without even a denial, just a silence that said more than his lines did. 2 days later, Bennett's phone rang from an unknown number. A voice she didn't recognize said, "You're not supposed to dig into old Hoover files," and hung up. A week after that, the military personnel database returned an error on Hale's record. In the official system, fields that had been there were now blank. The only copy with those lines intact was the printout Bennett had made the day before. When the trail goes dark, it's not always because it's cold. Sometimes, someone turned off the light. The truck itself, the M35, was still missing on paper. No surplus sale, no demolition certificate, no damage report. The last solid data point was a fuel issue at 9:42 p.m., June 16, 1973, at Hoover Base. Destination fields were vague, but the route stamp put its next movements inside the Silver Ridge perimeter. That timestamp matched the window when a neighbor heard a loud engine near the dam road, and when a friend thought she'd seen the Mustang heading west. It was the first hard link that put the two vehicles on the same night, in the same space. Back at the lab, Bennett asked for a reconstruction using 3D simulation. The modeling team fed in the Mustang's mass, ground slope, and the M35's ride height. The math returned a consistent picture. The Mustang took a low rear-end strike, precisely where the M35's front hardware would hit, then moved forward on a shallow arc, right where the lakebed drag marks later showed up on sonar. About 30 meters from shore, the ground dropped away, and the car went weightless. The simulation noted no reason to expect braking from the Mustang. The gear selector was in neutral in 2021, and the handbrake was down. The absence that mattered most wasn't a broken part. It was intent. There were no skid signatures from a driver trying to save the car. There was force from behind, and then there was water. The more the case leaned into federal records, the harder the walls pushed back. Bennett's request for the full Operation Blue Dust logs came back with a bureaucratic shrug. All records from that year were destroyed in the 1984 storage fire. She asked for duplicates. None were available. She checked state archives and found a microfilm drawer that hadn't been labeled correctly. Inside was a single frame that had survived a half-century of misfiling. Handwritten across the margin, "Truck M35, temp use under Whitmore clearance." It wasn't a verdict, but it was a handshake between the father with access and the truck that vanished the same night as his daughters. When a journalist caught wind of a possible military link, The headline landed the next morning. The Department of Defense issued a denial by noon. No evidence connecting military personnel to civilian incidents. That may have been true in a narrow sense, no published evidence yet, but it wasn't the same as saying it didn't happen. Inside the state office, calls came in from people who didn't sign their names advising the unit to focus on local leads. Funding questions surfaced. A meeting got canceled. Doors that had been neutral turned unfriendly. Bennett kept moving. She interviewed retired base staff, reviewed shift rosters, and filed a preservation request on any remaining blue dust materials. One man, a former clerk, remembered the long weekend in June '73 when vehicles moved after hours. He couldn't swear to the date, but he said he filled out a fuel chit for an M35 late in the evening and was told to log it as facility support. He also remembered a dam engineer. Older, formal, always by the book, coming through with a pass he'd never seen before. He didn't know the man's name. The roster from that weekend was missing. But the note in the clerk's personal notebook, pages he'd kept for nostalgia, listed two initials next to the after-hours entry: TH and RW. None of this answered the central question. It clarified how a car like Amy's could end up in a lake with belt buckles clicked and windows rolled up. It showed that a military truck was out when it shouldn't have been, going where it shouldn't have gone. Recorded under a program meant to help the dam. It showed a driver who'd been transferred before anyone started asking the right questions. It hinted at a father who had enough access to bend a system for a night. It didn't prove motive. It proved proximity, capacity, and control. Public reaction was split. Some residents wanted the past to stay put. Others felt something like relief, an explanation, even if unfinished, that honored the years of not knowing. The sheriff's office walked a line, confirming only that new evidence tied the Mustang to another vehicle, and that federal partners were assisting. Behind the calm language, the tone had changed. This wasn't only a story about two missing sisters anymore. It was a story about who had the power to decide what did and didn't get written down. Bennett wrote a single sentence in her case journal that night. They're protecting someone. The question is, who? She pulled the M35's route stamp again, stared at the time, and pinned it beside the model's drag path. Two thin red strings crossed over the lake's old shoreline like a quiet statement. For 48 years, the lake kept its silence. Now the men who built its walls were keeping theirs. But science doesn't take orders, and metal remembers more than men do. Science doesn't take sides. It only tells what the world leaves behind. By late 2021, the recovered Mustang sat inside the Nevada State Forensic Bureau, stripped of mud, algae, and mystery. Every inch of its frame was scanned, mapped, and modeled. The technicians didn't look for stories, they looked for evidence. Inside, both seatbelts were still fastened, buckles locked from the inside. That single detail proved something chilling. Amy and Rachel were inside the car before it ever touched the water. They hadn't been placed there afterward. The job of science now was simple. Rebuild what happened, second by second, without opinion or memory. The first breakthrough came from the bones. DNA from the femur samples matched living relatives in North Carolina, direct maternal lineage to the Whitmore family. That confirmation turned a cold mystery into a criminal case. The official report called it a double homicide by mechanical submersion. For nearly 5 decades, the sisters were names carved into silence. Now the proof was undeniable, and proof meant accountability. Forensic engineers began a deeper reconstruction using advanced simulation software. They fed the model with every measurable fact: mass, terrain, weather, slope, velocity. The results were consistent every time. The Mustang took a rear-end impact at roughly 25 miles an hour. The compression pattern on the bumper was uniform, not scattered like a crash. Steering was locked straight, tires aligned perfectly. The car hadn't been turning or braking. It was stationary when struck, pushed by something larger and higher. Exactly the profile of an M35 military transport truck. The report didn't use poetic words. It didn't need to. One line said everything. The angle of impact rules out collision. Indicates controlled propulsion. Someone had driven that truck with purpose. The next set of findings told an even sharper story. Primer flakes under the Mustang's bumper matched the chemical formula for U.S. military olive drab coating, a mix used only in government transport vehicles during the 1970s. Rust fibers recovered from the frame weren't chains. They were industrial-grade towing cable. And the algae pattern across the trunk proved the car entered the lake intact, sealed tight, with windows closed and doors locked. Each test eliminated the word accident. Each result pointed to planning. Then came the sonar data. The underwater scans of Silver Ridge Lake revealed 2 deep grooves stretching from the old access road to the drop point, 30 meters long, running perfectly parallel. The distance between them was 56 inches, the wheelbase of a 1970 Mustang. It was physical proof of movement, a silent record written in mud. The car hadn't swerved off a road or rolled downhill. It was dragged, then released. It didn't fall. It was placed. The digital team recreated the sequence in full motion. The animation showed the Mustang rolling forward under external force, accelerating slightly before tilting nose first as the terrain disappeared. Within seconds, the vehicle submerged, headlights still on. The 3D model aligned perfectly with sonar maps of the lake bed. When the footage finished, Detective Bennett, who had worked the case since its reopening, stared at the screen and said quietly, "They didn't die from the lake. The lake was just the cover." That single realization changed everything. Investigators compared the mechanical data with known military activity and Whitmore's work records from June 1973. The timeline fit together like gears finally clicking into place. 9:30 p.m., Amy and Rachel leave the diner. 9:42, an M35 truck is refueled under Whitmore clearance. 10 o'clock to 10:15, the impact sequence occurs. 10:18, drag pattern begins. 10:20, the Mustang sinks below surface. It was the first verified reconstruction of that night. It closed every gap the 1973 police report couldn't. Only one question remained. Why? The FBI brought in Dr. Adrian Kessler, a specialist in crash reconstruction. His statement was blunt. This was not a spontaneous event. It required 2 people, 1 vehicle capable of towing, and precise knowledge of where to access the lake. His conclusion turned the investigation from tragedy into conspiracy. Bennett added in her report that both victims were alive when the car was moved. The lab supported her statement. Microfractures in both women's wrist bones showed muscle tension at the moment of impact, a reflex of panic, not decay. The truth wasn't buried. It was locked inside the machinery that carried them down. The next lead came from where no one expected: the archives. An FBI data analyst running backup tapes from the National Archive found a second copy of the Operation Blue Dust fuel log. The one the military claimed was destroyed. The entry was brief, but devastating. Fuel requisition validated by R. Whitmore, civilian consultant, June 16th. Beneath it, driver, T.E. Hale. For the first time in 48 years, the paper trail placed both the father and the Air Force mechanic in control of the same truck, on the same night, with the same clearance. That single document was enough to reopen the case under federal jurisdiction. But the discovery didn't go unnoticed. Within hours, a retired colonel from Hoover Base contacted the state's attorney, warning against what he called further defamation of decorated personnel. The next morning, calls came urging the Bureau to delay the announcement until internal review. Bennett refused. "Evidence isn't defamation," she said. That afternoon, the press broke the story. Whitmore case may involve military cover-up. Within 2 days, the name Thomas E. Hale spread nationwide. Within a week, reporters surrounded his Tucson home. When Hale finally answered a call from investigators, his response was cryptic. He didn't deny the document. He didn't claim ignorance. He said only, "I did what I was told to do." When pressed for names, he ended the call. Minutes later, he rang back and asked one question. "Did you find the film?" Then he hung up. No one in the room knew what film he was talking about. Not yet. In the following weeks, the forensic team finished a 260-page report. Every line was evidence. Every chart spoke in plain numbers. The final page ended with a single conclusion that shattered the town's old story. This event could not have occurred without deliberate mechanical assistance and clearance-based access. The report was marked, "Pending Federal Review," but the signature line at the bottom stayed empty. Science had done its part. What came next would depend on who still had the courage to read it. And as the dust settled, one truth stood firm. Machines had spoken, and their story pointed upward, toward power. If you followed this far, don't stop here. In the next chapter, we'll uncover what those signatures really meant, and how a father's silence became the final barrier between justice and the truth. Like, share, and comment if you believe that time doesn't erase guilt. It only waits for proof. Science had revealed how it happened. Now came the harder question: why? Detective Laura Bennett sat in her office late into the night, surrounded by the cold blue light of computer screens and the smell of aging paper. The mechanical story was complete. The car, the truck, the impact. What remained was motive. The human reason behind the machine. For months, investigators had been tracing tire tracks and torque data. Now, they turned to paper trails and the language of silence. The first thread came from money. Federal records showed a sequence of deposits from Richard Whitmore to Thomas E. Hale between 1973 and 1975. Small at first, then increasing, spread across multiple accounts, totaling $42,000. None of the transfers had memos. No work contracts. No tax filings. Hale had been transferred to Arizona weeks after the sisters vanished. Whitmore, meanwhile, had been promoted within the Hoover Dam Authority. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. One forensic accountant summed it up plainly. It fits the pattern of hush payments. In every system built on secrets, money moves faster than truth. When agents searched Hale's Tucson home, they found more than documents. Hidden in a locked military storage trunk were blueprints of dam maintenance vehicles, old fuel tags, and a neat stack of letters signed only R.W. for Bedott. The handwriting matched samples from Whitmore's employee files. One note read, "We agreed it was necessary. The less anyone knows, the better for all." Another promised, "I've secured the clearance logs. You'll be safe." All were dated in the months following the disappearance. Each envelope carried a Hoover base return code. Then came the discovery that would change everything. A small, dust-covered film reel tucked behind Hale's attic insulation, marked Maintenance, 1973. After it was digitized, the footage ran for less than 2 minutes. Two figures appeared in the darkness, backlit by weak headlights. One pushed a car, clearly a Mustang, down a dirt incline. The other held a ropeline, guiding it. A faint voice broke the night. "No one needs to know." The camera jolted, then cut out. It wasn't evidence a jury could convict on. But to Bennett, the frame told a truth words couldn't. The build of one man, broad shoulders, slightly stooped, matched Richard Whitmore's physical profile from an old ID photo. Investigators dug deeper. Records confirmed that Whitmore had Level B military engineering clearance under Operation Blue Dust, a joint logistics program between the Army and the Hoover Dam Authority. He supervised hydraulic systems near restricted access roads, the same routes leading to Silver Ridge Lake. With that clearance, he could check out a vehicle, move after hours, and bypass local jurisdiction entirely. He didn't just know how to get there. He knew how to make sure no one else did. Power doesn't always mean privilege. Sometimes it's simply permission to hide. Bennett revisited old statements from 1973. Several residents had remarked that Whitmore was unusually calm during the search. One said, "He looked like a man who already knew what he wouldn't find." Others recalled how he stopped attending briefings within a week, saying, "The girls probably ran off." There was no anger, no plea for more manpower. The more she read, the clearer the motive became. Not revenge, not rage. Fear. According to Amy's college roommate, Amy had argued with her father the week she vanished. She'd found inconsistencies in maintenance logs for the Hoover project and believed he was falsifying inspection data to conceal structural shortcuts linked to military supply routes. If she went public, it could have ended his career and exposed federal misconduct. Rachel, loyal and impulsive, had likely followed her sister that night. That confrontation was the turning point, a private argument that spiraled into an unplanned tragedy. then into a deliberate cover-up. Hale's towing truck and Whitmore's clearance made the disposal possible. One night of panic became decades of silence. The team next uncovered a memo from Hoover Base archives stamped Incident Redaction, Civilian Interference, June 1973. The document bore Whitmore's initials and those of 2 senior officers. It instructed that all auxiliary vehicle movements be cleared and reassigned as hydraulic testing. Later, the phrase civilian interference was struck out by pen. It was the only memo in Whitmore's file not logged through official engineering channels. The edit was bureaucratic camouflage, paperwork written to erase people. Paperwork doesn't lie. It just waits. In the years that followed, Whitmore lived as though nothing had happened. Neighbors described him as punctual, polite, and detached. He sold the family home in 1975, retired early, and moved to Henderson. He never held another vigil for Amy or Rachel. He rarely spoke their names. He died in 1999, eulogized as a respected engineer who had devoted his life to keeping Nevada's water safe. At the service, one former colleague whispered, "He built walls to hold water, but what he really held back was truth." When Bennett compiled everything, the theory was no longer abstract, it was a straight line. Amy discovered corruption at the dam. She threatened to report it. A confrontation escalated into panic. Hale, loyal to Whitmore and the system that paid him, helped conceal the result. The lake became a solution, not a crime scene. No violence, no weapon, just logistics. Some crimes begin with fear, others with pride. This one began with both. When the letters and a still image from the Super 8 film were leaked to the press, Boulder Ridge split down the middle. Half refused to believe it. The other half said they'd always known something was wrong. Newspapers called it the Whitmore scandal, the engineer who buried his daughters. Hoover Dam Authority issued a public apology for historical oversight and record mismanagement. The town council held a silent memorial that ended in shouting matches. For Bennett, the hardest part wasn't the outrage. It was the quiet ones. The older residents who said, he did what he thought he had to do. That was how denial survived, by disguising itself as understanding. Her public statement was short and steady. This was never about villains. It was about accountability. Weeks later, Bennett drove to the old Whitmore Lake House, now abandoned, windows cracked, walls marked by water stains. On a shelf near the entryway, she found a rusted plaque that read, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." She stood there for a long time, looking out over the lake that had both concealed and revealed his secret. He built the walls that kept the water out, but nothing he built could keep the truth from finding its way back in. As the cold case unit prepared its final summary, one line from Hale's transcript echoed through every page. "I wasn't the one who made the decision. I just followed orders." The system that once protected him was now under investigation itself. A federal task force formed to determine how a civilian engineer gained unchecked access to military assets, and why no one questioned it for nearly half a century. Power can protect, or it can corrupt. The Whitmore case proved it could do both. For the first time, the truth had names, dates, and signatures. And soon, it would have consequences. If you've stayed with this story, don't miss what comes next, when justice finally reopens the file that power tried to close forever. Like, share, and subscribe for Part 7, Justice Reawakened. The truth waited 48 years, then someone finally listened. When the Nevada Cold Case Unit submitted its final forensic report to the Federal Review Board, the line that changed everything sat at the top of the page. Homicide, federal involvement suspected. The file that once gathered dust now carried the weight of national interest. DNA confirmed the victims. Financial records tied the money. The film showed the act. For the first time, there was no room left for rumor, only evidence. Detective Laura Bennett had seen her share of closed doors, but this one began to crack. The science spoke, she told her team quietly. Now it's time for the system to answer. Within days, the FBI assigned a task force under the name Project Resurgence. Their first step? Verify every lead connecting the Hoover base to the 1973 disappearance. They subpoenaed transport logs, fuel records, and clearance lists. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Entries overwritten, dates mismatched, reports replaced by blank pages. One analyst noted in his briefing, "This isn't decay. This was cleaning." When paper lies, it's because someone taught it how. Bennett pushed for full disclosure, but federal lawyers pushed back. They called for extensions, citing national security protocols. The subtext was clear. Stall until interest fades. But this time, the headlines came faster than bureaucracy. Major outlets picked up the story. 1973 Sisters' disappearance reclassified as active federal investigation. Public attention became the one thing the system couldn't control. Under pressure, authorization was granted to reopen the Whitmore case in full. In Tucson, agents arrived at the home of Thomas E. Hale. He was 78, thin, and tethered to an oxygen line. They found him sitting in a recliner surrounded by photographs of a life spent trying to forget one night. When shown the digitized Super 8 film, he didn't look away. After a long silence, he whispered, "I towed it. I didn't kill them." Pressed for why he did it, his voice broke into a rasp. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I was told to protect the family." When asked who gave the order, he hesitated and said softly, "He wanted it over." The he was clear. Richard Whitmore. The agents rewound the footage and played it again. Two silhouettes on a slope, a rope, a push, a car sliding into darkness. Hale's hand tumbled. "He made me promise it was mercy," he said, eyes fixed on the frozen frame. The audio captured every word, a confession wrapped in loyalty. There are crimes you commit with your hands, and others you commit by standing still. When news of Hale's statement broke, Silver Ridge split in half. Old neighbors filled talk shows and social media threads. Some called Whitmore a hero who did what he had to do. Others called him a coward who murdered his own truth. The Hoover Authority held a press conference, vowing transparency. But the unease on their faces said more than their words. The same dam that once symbolized stability now represented silence. Bennett didn't slow down. Appointed as liaison investigator under the federal task force, She combed through every forgotten archive, chasing a missing piece of paper rather than a ghost. In a stack of personal memos from the dam's executive files, she found one dated June 18, 1973, the morning after the sisters vanished. Typed in all caps, "Ensure Mr. Whitmore's personal request is handled internally. Avoid escalation. No signature, no initials." She read it twice, then wrote in her notes, "The cover-up was never a secret. It was a choice." By late summer, the Department of Justice announced formal charges against Hale: obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. Subpoenas extended to surviving members of the Hoover Base Logistics Division. Federal prosecutors reopened a dormant review of Operation Blue Dust. For the first time, the Whitmore family name appeared not as a symbol of loss, but as a point of accountability. Justice may be late, but it never loses its memory. A few weeks before the trial, Bennett visited Hale again. His health had declined, but his mind was sharp. "Why did you help him?" she asked. He stared at the wall and said, "Because he was my superior. Because I believed him." "And when did you stop?" His answer came after a long pause. "When the water went still." Tears formed in the corners of his eyes. Not for the crime, but for the years spent convincing himself it was duty. Local papers ran the full exposé soon after. The Whitmore cover-up: how a dam engineer buried his family's secret. The Hoover Authority issued a public statement admitting complicity by omission. A statewide inquiry was launched to review how military projects blurred the line between protection and privilege. Schools removed Whitmore's name from plaques and scholarships. The annual engineering fair, once held in his honor, was renamed the Silver Ridge Remembrance Day. A legacy built on lies is only as strong as the silence around it. By December 2021, the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that Hale would face trial. His testimony would serve as the cornerstone of federal accountability, even if the man he protected was long dead. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, cameras ready. When Bennett stepped outside, a journalist asked if this was revenge. She shook her head. "This isn't vengeance," she said quietly. "It's history, correcting itself." Her words ran across every major paper. After nearly 50 years, the Whitmore case was no longer a mystery. It was a reckoning. That night, Bennett sat in her car outside the courthouse. She opened the transcript from Hale's final interview. On the last page, a single line caught her eye. "Ask them about the file. The one he kept at the dine." She circled it in red ink. There was still something missing. Something Whitmore never turned in. Something the dine might still be hiding. Outside, the city was quiet. The kind of silence that feels earned, not imposed. The lake had given back its dead, but the dam still held its secrets. Justice was finally awake, and the men who had hidden behind rank and reputation were about to stand in its light. Justice doesn't erase the past. It simply forces it to be heard aloud. The trial of United States versus Thomas E. Hale opened under a hard Nevada sun. The courthouse looked almost defiant against the desert. Pale stone, sharp edges, and wide windows that reflected everything but let nothing in. Outside, reporters packed the steps. Inside, the air was still. Hale sat at the defense table, frail and grey, his oxygen tube resting across his lap. Before him lay the life he'd tried to forget. Photographs of a 1970 Mustang, rusted rope fragments sealed in plastic, the digitized Super 8 film, and copies of the letters he once swore would never surface. For nearly 50 years, the Whitmore case had been a story told in whispers. Today, it was evidence under oath. The prosecutor began with restraint. "This case isn't about murder in the ordinary sense," he said. "It's about the decision to bury truth, and the years spent defending that lie." His tone was deliberate, his pace slow, each word dragging the room closer to the weight of what it had ignored. On the screens behind him, the jury watched the evidence appear piece by piece. The financial trail between Whitmore and Hale, the metal scratches matching military tow hooks, the last frame of the car before it vanished underwater. In the gallery, older residents of Silver Ridge sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed forward. Some wept quietly. Others stared at the floor, unwilling to admit what they'd long suspected. When the defense rose, the mood shifted. Hale's lawyer kept it simple. A plea for understanding, not forgiveness. He called Hale a man caught in hierarchy, bound by loyalty, not evil. He repeated the same phrase Hale had said for years. "I did what I was told to do." His argument leaned on obedience, not guilt. But the courtroom seemed colder with every repetition. The jurors didn't look at the lawyer. They looked at Hale, and through him, at the ghost of Richard Whitmore. On the second day, the prosecution began presenting the letters. Projected on the courtroom wall, Whitmore's handwriting filled the space. One line read, "I've secured the logs. No one will find them." Another, "We acted to protect reputation and order. The rest is consequence." Each word came from 1973, but they felt written for this moment. The handwriting analyst confirmed the signature. Experts verified the paper's age. Even though Whitmore had been gone for over 2 decades, his presence seemed to breathe through the ink. Then came the moment no one could prepare for. The lights dimmed, and the Super 8 footage flickered onto the screen. A car on a slope. 2 men in shadow. A rope line pulled taut. The sound of gravel sliding. Then water swallowing the noise. A single voice whispered, "No one needs to know." When the screen went black, silence stayed behind. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the judge sat still, one hand over his mouth. Bennett, seated behind the prosecution, closed her eyes. Not in shock, but in acknowledgement. It was the first time the truth had ever been seen in motion. The next morning, the jury heard the forensic specialists. One after another, they confirmed what the film had implied. The car didn't roll. It was pulled. The sisters were inside, conscious. The military truck had been authorized under Whitmore's name. The signatures lined up. The metal didn't lie. The experts' voices were calm, but their findings left no room for interpretation. It wasn't an accident. It was intent written in machinery. Finally, Hale took the stand. He spoke softly, his voice weakened by years of denial. He admitted towing the car, falsifying the transport logs, and accepting money afterward. He said it was a family matter, Hale murmured, eyes on the floor. He said no one else needed to suffer. The prosecutor asked if he ever felt remorse. Hale's answer came like a slow exhale. Every day. But after a while, guilt becomes part of your routine. For a few seconds, the courtroom felt frozen, not out of pity, but recognition. This was what silence looked like when it aged. Bennett was called next. Her role was procedural, a factual testimony, but her words carried a quiet gravity that filled the room. This investigation wasn't about punishment, she said. It was about giving the truth a name again. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried across every corner. In that stillness, even the lawyers stopped taking notes. By the time the prosecutor stood for his closing remarks, the audience already knew how it would end. Still, he spoke as if to history itself. It took half a century, he said, but the truth finally surfaced. These sisters were forgotten not by time, but by choice. Today that choice ends. He gestured toward the evidence table, the rope, the letters, the film. These aren't objects, they're witnesses. They never stopped speaking. We just stopped listening. When the jury returned after 2 days, no one breathed. The verdict came without hesitation. Guilty on all counts. Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and abuse of authority. The judge leaned forward, voice steady. Loyalty without conscience isn't honor. It's complicity. He sentenced Hale to 20 years in federal prison. Hale nodded once, eyes wet but unresisting. He didn't speak again. It wasn't relief or regret. It was the sound of history being written correctly for the first time. Outside, the story spread across every major network. Silver Ridge, once proud of its local hero, now faced its reflection. Some residents still defended Whitmore. He was protecting his family, they said. Others couldn't forgive what protection had cost. The Hoover Authority issued a statement acknowledging institutional negligence. A new scholarship was announced in the Whitmore sisters' name, dedicated to victims of government suppression. A week later, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil by the lake. The same shoreline that had once hidden the car now shimmered with light. No speeches, no ceremony. Just names whispered in unison. Amy and Rachel. The sound rolled across the water like a soft exhale after decades of holding its breath. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It just waits for courage. When the trial finally closed, the courthouse emptied slowly. The reporters left. The cameras shut down. On the evidence table, the objects remained: the rope, the letters, the film reel. Silent but permanent. Bennett stayed behind for a moment, She packed the files neatly into a box and signed her initials on the tab. To her, this wasn't victory. It was completion. Before leaving, she glanced at the film reel one last time. The same reel that had shattered a half-century of denial. Outside, the light from the courthouse stretched long over the pavement. It felt quieter now, not because the noise had ended, but because the truth finally had a place to rest. Justice doesn't return the lost. It only restores the truth they left behind. When the noise fades, what's left isn't silence. It's peace. The sun rises over Silver Ridge Lake, the water calm again after years of drought. A thin layer of mist floats above the surface, glowing in soft gold. On the shoreline, a small crowd gathers, families, reporters, townspeople, and members of the cold case unit who worked for years to bring this moment to life. 2 white caskets rest under the open sky. After 48 years, Amy and Rachel Whitmore are finally laid to rest, side by side. Detective Laura Bennett stands in the back, quiet, her hands clasped. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. The priest's final words drift over the lake as the sound of gentle waves fills the space between them. For decades, this lake had swallowed a secret. Now, it holds a story, finally told. Later that morning, the town unveils a memorial near the old dock where the Mustang was found. A gray stone catches the morning light. The engraving reads, "Truth rises, even from water." People stand around it silently. An old woman wiping her eyes, a young boy tracing the words with his fingers. This isn't a ceremony about justice anymore. It's about learning how to live with the truth. Time didn't heal this town. Truth did. Slowly, quietly, in its own stubborn way. Back in Carson City, the cold case unit finalizes the file. Nearly 2,000 pages of reports, interviews, and evidence are stacked neatly in a binder labeled Whitmore/Hale. Bennett signs the last page, steady and deliberate. Her supervisor asks if she'll take some time off. She nods, but her eyes are fixed on the archive cabinet in front of her. She opens the door and places the box inside. The letters, the rope fragments, the Super 8 film reel. When the metal door closes, the sound feels like punctuation. Justice doesn't end when the gavel falls. It ends when truth is preserved. The Super 8 footage, once the key to the entire case, now sits inside the Nevada History Museum. Beneath the display, a plaque reads, "Recovered, 2021. Donated in memory of Amy and Rachel Whitmore." The clip runs silently, without sound or commentary. Visitors watch in quiet reflection. What was once evidence has become part of history. Seeing it no longer feels like accusation. It feels like understanding. In Silver Ridge, the town begins to change. The local paper publishes a special issue titled The Whitmore Legacy: Lessons from Silence. At the old diner, the one the sisters left from that night, a photo of Amy and Rachel now hangs above the counter. Beneath it, the owner's handwritten note reads, "We kept your seats. We just didn't know it." Tourists visit less for curiosity and more for meaning. Teachers bring students to the memorial as part of civic lessons on integrity and accountability. Some towns forget their ghosts. Silver Ridge learned to live beside them. The surviving members of the Whitmore family issue a single statement: "We do not forgive what happened, but we accept that the truth belongs to everyone now." With that, they create the Whitmore Integrity Foundation, funding scholarships in ethics for students in engineering and law enforcement, the very worlds that failed their family once before. Its motto is simple: because silence can build walls, and truth can break them. At a small press event, Detective Bennett faces a few local reporters. One asks what really solved the case after so many decades. She pauses for a moment and replies, "Technology didn't solve this case. Persistence did." Cameras click. She continues, softer now. "We didn't find justice in the courtroom. We found it in the act of not giving up." Her words air across national outlets, not as a quote from an investigator, but as a reminder for anyone who's ever been told to stop searching. Months later, a short obituary appears in a Tucson newspaper. Thomas E. Hale, 79, passed away in federal custody. No family listed. The note ends with one line: "Inmate expressed remorse and cooperation." There's no public funeral, but a week later Bennett receives a small envelope addressed in neat handwriting. Inside, a single sentence: "Tell them I wasn't trying to hide the truth. I just didn't know how to face it." She folds it carefully and places it in the Whitmore archive box. The file, at last, is complete. Clips from the trial begin circulating again online. One line stands out, shared thousands of times: "Loyalty without conscience isn't honor. It's complicity." Law schools start referencing it. In college ethics lectures, the Whitmore case becomes a lesson. Not about crime, but about silence. About what happens when doing nothing becomes the easier choice. Near the Hoover Dam, the authority funds a small park in Richard Whitmore's name. Not as tribute, but as a reminder. A bronze plaque explains his role, both heroic and flawed. Children play where concrete once represented secrecy. Their laughter echoes across the same walls he helped build. Redemption doesn't rewrite history. It teaches us to stop repeating it. As the day ends, the lake is still again. The water reflects the orange glow of sunset, soft and endless. The memorial stone stands alone, steady against the wind. The reflection of the sky stretches across the surface, like a long, quiet breath. Proof that peace doesn't erase what came before. It just lets it rest. Sometimes, the loudest crimes are buried in silence. And sometimes, forgiveness isn't found in court. It's found in truth. This is the story of Amy and Rachel Whitmore, and how time finally. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what truth means to you, because stories like this remind us that no matter how long it takes, the truth always finds its way back.